Hi everyone, Talia from Zart Art. Today we're going to be doing a ink blowing drawing using Lousy ink. Now, Lousy ink is a recycled sustainable printing ink. It's made out of print cartridges and has been recycled from those. The artists that created this are also Melbourne based, so that's a pretty cool topic if you are a Victorian teacher looking at using this kind of material. So if you're doing a ink blowing activity, it's important to have your materials ready to go. So we're going to be using a cartridge paper. The thicker GSM, the better. This one is about 120, so even thicker would be great to use if you have that available. We've also got water and our little canisters here, which we'll use to distribute the ink and water it down to get different tones. Now I'm just going to empty out a little bit of the ink so we can get some of those variations in tones. So a little bit of ink is enough to use. We're not doing a huge picture, so we don't need too much ink to go over the page. And just with this water, grab a little bit in there. So we want two different tones in these canisters. So in one, I'm going to add more water than I did to the first one, just so we have those different tones of grey. Now that we've got all of that prepared, we'll be starting off with ink blowing. Today we're going to be making a picture based on swans or birds. The reason we're going to do swans is because they create nice organic forms which you can replicate with the direction that you'll be blowing the ink. So for the ink blowing itself, we'll just make sure that the ink is nicely positioned just so nothing tips over. If you were doing this with younger kids, you'd probably distribute this into smaller bottles, but I think I can handle doing this on my own without making too much of a mess. Now, ink blowing is typically quite a messy activity, so I've got a pipette to distribute the ink as I blow on it so it will move on the paper and not absorb too quickly. We've also got our trusty silicone mat just to make sure it doesn't get on the table. So as I drop the ink, I'm going to blow directly onto the paper just so the ink doesn't sink in too quickly. Now, if you can see that, the ink sinks in quite quickly as you blow on the paper, and that's just because it's cartridge paper and it's quite absorbent. If you did this on something like mineral paper, it would sit on the surface for a longer period of time, but it also has quite a bit of trouble actually drying, so your ink could stay wet for a very long time. So cartridge paper is quite nice to use, and you can see the really nice loose organic forms starting to take shape. Now that we've got a few shapes on the paper, they don't really look like much now, but this is the point where we're going to try and take the abstract forms and turn them into something that's a bit more recognisable. So even in this image, I can kind of see the shapes of where I would put the wings, the shapes of the neck, and that's all in where you blow the ink. So have a bit of an idea in your head when you're beginning of where the forms are going to sit and how they're going to look. But now with our watered down inks, we're going to work over the top and make them actually look like those bird forms. Now I'm just blending the inks together to make sure I've got those tones. Just going to do a bit of a test on this paper to make sure that our ink is actually watered down enough, and those tones look a bit too similar for me, so I'm going to add some more water to try and lighten them up and do a bit more of a grey scale. Scratchy, scratchy. Scratchy, scratchy, scratch. test. That looks like it should work a bit better. Now it's better to go over with a dry brush to start with, just so you don't make too many indentations that you're not happy with. So I'm just going to do the C line. So in my image, we're going to make it like the swans are coming out of the water. So I'll just mark off where they will be sitting, and then just with that dry brush, making the tones of the waves or the water that they're sitting on. Now that we've got a little bit of the background on, we've got the little clouds and a little bit of the water in the scene, what I'm going to do is work over the top of the bold black lines, which are going to be our swans. So I'm going to work with them to try and make the shapes look more like those forms that you would see as a bird flying or swimming in the water. Now that we've finished our image, you can see the really nice loose forms of the birds, quite a nice abstract look, and it's a good way for younger kids especially to try ink blowing techniques, which are traditionally quite messy, but sometimes you have to embrace the mess, Ethan, and have a bit of fun with just exploring those methods. And then after you've got your ink down, you can work on creating the different tones and turning it into an image that represents something.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.
Likes on the last video.
A whole 9.
Not a single dislike.
Wow.
A lot of ambivalence, no dislikes though.
Where's the ambivalent button?